Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. I'm here with Glenn Condren, and we are going to talk to you this morning about the introduction to ASP.NET 5. We had Scott Hunter, our boss, come and give us a little bit of a pep talk. This is going to be a little bit different than some classes that you may have seen. We're going to be minimal slides, and by minimal we mean basically none. We have like 3 slides.
Yeah, maybe 3.
Yeah. So we'll have a couple of slides to talk about some concepts like MVC, Model View Controller, but for the most part we thought it would be interesting to spend the time in Visual Studio. Glenn works on ASP.NET, and he is going to walk me through how ASP.NET 5 works over the course of the day, and then we'll bring in other guests as we get deeper into this stuff. Let's just take a look at a couple slides that we do have to introduce ourselves. My name is Scott, and I am a program manager here at Microsoft, and I focus on Azure and ASP.NET. And I've been blogging for a very, very long time, and I like podcasting.
So my name is Glenn. I worked as a developer for a long time in Australia before I moved here to the US, where I worked on the Entity Framework team for the Entity Framework 6 release. And then I moved to ASP.NET just as we were starting ASP.NET 5. So just a little bit of ASP.NET 4, but pretty much all ASP.NET 5 whilst I've been on the ASP.NET team. And it's been amazing.
Cool. All right, so let's take a look at my machine here, and we'll talk about how we get started. So you can get ASP.NET by getting Visual Studio, right? That's the most important thing. So you can go a couple of different places. Certainly you can go out there and search, but you can also say visualstudio.com/free. One of the great things about Visual Studio 2015 is that the Community Edition is free for students, it's free for small companies, and it's free for open source projects.
Yeah. Now we did have this thing, like we had Express right before this. We had Visual Studio Web Express, right? But the difference here is that with Visual Studio Express, it wasn't really, you couldn't install, Web Essentials or the didn't have the extensibility points that.
Right. One of the great things about Visual Studio for newbies is that it's got extensions that you can plug in, other stuff that makes it extended. Express was just web pages.
Just what we gave you.
That was it.
Yeah, and it had lots of flavors. It was a little bit confusing because you would have, you had a few different editions, and it didn't really, I never knew personally which one I wanted. But now, Community Edition, it's got everything, it's extensible, so you can install your favorite plugin if you find a cool plugin, and it's good, it's really good.
So from here, we can see we've got Visual Studio Community to choose from, and that's effectively the professional version. So you're going to be a professional web developer when you start using Visual Studio. Then there's Visual Studio Online. We're not going to talk about that in this tutorial, but that's a place for you to share code if you want to start working in a team or start using source control, which is beyond the scope of what we're talking about. And then in another Microsoft Virtual Academy, we're going to talk about Visual Studio Code, although we may show it once or twice. It's a code editor. So we have the difference between what's called a code editor and an IDE, or an integrated development environment. IDEs are a little more sophisticated.
Yeah. Now, if we have people out there who are already kind of learning HTML, very new developers, they're learning CSS, they're learning HTML, you're learning JavaScript, chances are that your experiences to date have been in a code editor, the likes of Notepad++ and Sublime Text and things of this sort. They give you some syntax highlighting, they maybe give you some statement completion in your methods, they make it look easier to make sense of HTML and make sense of CSS and things like that. And that's kind of the area that Visual Studio Code is going to provide. It's going to give you those sorts of benefits that I just described, as well as some other things that you would traditionally only really see in an IDE, like IntelliSense in the case of ASP.NET.
Right, and IntelliSense is when you're typing and it suggests the code that you would want to write.
Right, and it's distinct, like I remember, it's distinct from statement completion, the word I said earlier, is where I've typed this word before, so when I go dot, it'll give me, like when I start to type, it will give me like auto-completion, right? Like auto-completion in a form on a website. Whereas IntelliSense is when I'm starting to type, it actually knows about my code and it knows the things that I should be or could be doing here, and it will provide me the help to do it. And it's been, that feature is one of the most valuable features of Visual Studio typically gives to its developers.
Yeah, and we're going to show you that. It may already seem like things have gotten advanced and we're throwing out words like IntelliSense and statement completion. We'll demonstrate all of that. So
Yeah.
we'll bring it right down. So if I go and say I want to download Visual Studio Community, that will go and start the download, and then I'm going to fast forward time because I already have installed the enterprise version, and the enterprise version just has a couple more features for big companies. Enterprise is just a funny word that means giant company that you will work at someday.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get anything. I'm not going to show you anything here in this version of Visual Studio that you wouldn't already have in Community. So no worries
that's right.
about that. Now, when you start up Visual Studio for the first time, you get a news feed, and there's some videos over here in the corner. So what's nice about this is that this gets refreshed all the time. So if you want to go and watch other videos and learn about different features that are specific to Visual Studio, you can explore that, as well as blog posts and things. You'll also notice that in Visual Studio, I'm logged in already.
Yeah.
When you run Visual Studio for the first time, you have to sign in.
Why do I have to do that?
Because it actually roams your settings. So if I sign into Visual Studio on another machine, my fonts and my colors and my theme, right now I'm using the blue theme, there's also a light theme and a dark theme, those will come along with me. So at this point, I'm going to say New Project. And on the left-hand side here, there's a whole bunch of stuff, Glenn, to pick from.
Yeah, there is lots of stuff.
I don't care about a lot of this as a new developer.
No.
But this is done by language rather than by Windows app versus ASP.NET or web app.
Yeah, that's right. And it's because, I mean, that's the way it's been for a long time, but, picking a language, you usually know your language. Often or frequently you know what language you're going to try, with C# or VB or F# or something.
And we're going to be doing this in C#. When we open that up, we have choices for Windows and Android and things. We're going to pick web.
Yes, and in here we tried to give you just a single thing to pick. You don't need to know ahead of time, what style of web application. Well, you don't need to know right now what type of web application you're going to build. We just say, just build web application, give it a name, click OK, and then we'll give you some extra help later on.
Okay, so I'll just come in here and I can give it a name if I want to, but if I don't, it'll suggest a name. I'll just say MVA.
Yeah.
And it's already selected, ASP.NET Web Application. When I hit OK, it's going to pop up this dialog. Now, I might initially be a little bit concerned, but I will point out that Web Application is already selected, and I can just hit OK at this point.
You can, absolutely.
But I do have some potential choices here, and I've got ASP.NET 4.6, and I've got ASP.NET 5.
Yeah.
I'm assuming since we're doing Intro to ASP.NET 5.
Probably want the ASP.NET 5 ones. It might make it easier to talk about ASP.NET 5, yeah.
Now, what's the difference between this web application and this empty
one? So the difference here is how much stuff we do for you beforehand. So I was talking to we have a new PM on our team.
New program manager.
A new program manager, it's the same job that I have. And he's new, he's just come out of college and he's never really done much ASP.NET before. He has done web stuff, he's done some Node and he's done a few things. And he felt overwhelmed when he clicked web application because there was heaps of stuff there. So the difference here is us trying to give you a few different levels of content that we generate for you when you click new. If you really want to understand what everything does, click empty and build up to web application inside your own thing. If you want to a quick way to get going where there's a lot of examples of how to do things and there's a lot of stuff like authentication and things just scaffolded out for you and then you can just hit the ground running, pick web application and away you go. Okay. If you know ahead of time, there's a web API one in the middle there. If you know ahead of time that all you really want your server code to do is return you some JSON because you're going to be mostly in the client, and we'll talk about more of this stuff later as well.
Right, because there's a lot of words
pick
there.
web API, right? Yeah, but web API is where you're not really giving people HTML, you're giving them data instead of HTML for the most part, right?
So empty is literally that. It is empty.
It's empty. Well, mostly empty.
We're going to start with that one.
Yeah.
Web API makes JSON, JavaScript object notation. JSON is just a way of JavaScript as data.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that. And web APIs usually feed mobile applications.
Feed some other
data.
type of application.
And then web app is kind of like if I was going to make a brochure and I want to jumpstart.
Yeah. Or you're making some site like the the live.asp.net site that we see, I'm not sure if Damien used web application as his template.
Yeah,
but
so you're referring to live.asp.net, this site
Yeah,
here,
that's right.
where we do our community stand-ups. This is a
Yeah.
very basic application.
it is. I mean, we mentioned it earlier in the video with Scott Hunter. This site has auth. It has a lot of stuff that web application template would have already had configured for you. I don't know that that's the way that Damien did it.
We're
but
actually going to
but he could
do,
have.
on the second day, we're going to do a complete
Build this?
walkthrough and see
Right.
how he built it.
That'll be great. Yeah. So so if you know you're going to need auth and you're going to need a home page and you're going to need an about page and you're going to need things like that, web application's got all that for you, and you can just start editing the names and away you go. And that's what it's good for.
So I'm going to hit empty, and I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to say creating project. And this will take just a moment because it's setting up the files, but also bringing down libraries and things that are needed. There we go.
Yeah.
So this is already done, and it comes up with this README file. This is actually a kind of a browser inside of Visual Studio, and it's got this project README. And this is a useful thing. It is a real file that's sitting in your folder, so you want to keep this around.
Yeah.
And why this is useful is that it's got links to help. So if you want to learn about how to add data or run your app locally and you want to spend some time exploring that, like I said, this introduction on Virtual Academy is not just for old timers. It's also for maybe you're a PHP developer and you haven't spent time in Visual Studio. Or maybe you're just a college student, you're getting started.
So can we open the Solution Explorer real quick here?
So on the right-hand side here, we've got a bunch of vertical tabs.
Yeah.
Right here. And you said, let's open the Solution Explorer. We're going to explore the solution. This will probably be open by default, and then there's a pin
Most
here.
of the time, yeah. So the reason I wanted to do that is just because there's a file down there, the second one from the bottom, right?
This is the same file?
Yeah. Project README, right? If you double click it, right?
Right. So this file here is this file, is the one we're
had some
looking at. And
people
there's, look at that,
complain,
there's the HTML for that.
Yeah, so I did have, the reason I brought that up is I was listening to a podcast where somebody was talking about ASP.NET 5, their first impressions, and one of the things they didn't understand and were surprised by was there's this README in my thing for some reason, and I don't
where's
really
that coming
understand
from?
why that, and they didn't understand, well, they were coming from the other angle in that they had the file and didn't understand what the file was, right? And they had
and
this thing.
here's a funny little thing. You've got these tabs at the top here, right? I can actually right-click on that, say New Vertical Tab Group. So here is the HTML in the browser inside of Visual Studio, and here is the underneath, the code. So the rendered HTML and the actual HTML.
And for those of you who are just learning HTML, this is the same as what you've always done.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool. So let's close that. And what does empty come with here? We've got a lot of icons here.
We do have a lot of icons. For those who aren't familiar with our stuff with Visual Studio and ASP.NET already, a lot of them probably aren't real familiar.
Okay.
So we have a startup.cs file. This is the code that is going to run on your server when somebody tries to make a request to your web application.
Is this running every time the web application gets hit, or is this when it starts up for the first time?
Starts up for the first time, hence the name startup.
Okay, so this isn't every request.
No, but there's some stuff in here that you can configure that will happen every request. But we'll talk about that as we go. We have a project JSON. We might as well go through some of the files and talk about them before we get in.
Well, but also let's take a moment, if you don't mind.
Sure.
There's this notion of a solution.
Yeah.
And then there's the one. I know I named the project MVA.
Yeah.
This implies that I can have multiple projects within
Absolutely.
a solution. So a solution is a collection of projects.
It is in Visual Studio, yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I think in some of the translations of Visual Studio, that's literally what it gets translated to.
Collection of
Project
projects.
collection.
Oh, I didn't know
like
that.
that,
In non-English languages.
Yeah.
Cool.
This is and the MVA. It's important. There is a file on disk, a solution file, and there is a project file called MVA that are there to help Visual Studio make this view for you and make sense of the world. If you're using Visual Studio Code or things like that, you don't necessarily need those project files,
Right.
but they're there for Visual Studio.
This is a good reminder that this Solution Explorer, I can actually right-click on it.
Yeah, open a
I just
file.
right-click, and I can say Open Folder in File Explorer.
Yeah.
And when I do that, it's kind of an interesting exercise to just take Windows Explorer and compare.
Yeah.
You can see here is a ASP.NET Xproj.
Yeah.
That's probably that.
Yep.
I see my project README. That's that. So for the most part, what you see here is reflective of what's
What happens
happening
if
on
you add a
disk.
new file over here?
Over here,
Yeah.
if I right-click and say New Text File,
Yeah.
hey, this is...
Look at that.
Oh, it's already picked it up?
Yeah.
This is new?
Yeah.
So I just made a text file, and I just hit Enter.
So if anybody watching is already familiar with ASP.NET of the past, or ASP.NET as you know it today, actually Visual Studio as you know it today, really, that doesn't work.
So the idea that I just added a file
Yeah.
and it automatically showed up
Yeah.
is different from in the previous versions where you had to add the file manually.
Exactly, and that's because that MVA.xproj used to have a list of all the files in your project, and we don't have that in ASP.NET 5.
And if I delete that, it's just actually gone off of the disk.
Yeah.
So that means that anything that I add here shows up in the project.
And
Okay.
that helps you, especially newer people, I guess, understand what this thing is. It's not really special. It's just all the files that make up my web application. Right? So we have a project JSON and a hosting ini file.
Let's see if we can actually just get some
talk about some stuff.
Let's get some HTML to show up.
Yeah.
Let me guess something, and you tell
Okay,
me.
go for
so
it.
I've got this project.readme.
Yeah.
I'm going to click on that, and what I'm going to try, because I'm learning web development here, I'm going to right-click and say rename.
Heard it here first, folks.
Okay.
Scott doesn't know where.
Well, I'm in this case, for the purposes of the MVA, let's call me the developer advocate.
Excellent.
I am the proxy for the viewer.
The viewer. All right.
So
I like it.
I'm a smart person. I think so. I'm going to go here. I'm going to rename this index.html because
Okay.
I've seen that before.
Yeah.
I've seen that before. with other-
Index.html should be the
Right.
default thing
Maybe
that gets
that's the
loaded when I
default.
browse to a page.
Maybe
right?
it could be
Browse to a
default.
site.
And then I'm going to look up here and I see a play button
Yeah.
that looks like a VCR button. Okay?
For those of you who know what
So
a VCR is.
I'm going to click on that. Okay. And and then something's going to happen. It says here, it says build succeeded,
Yeah.
and the circle of patience just popped up.
Yeah, and in an incognito window.
Actually, oops, and then I got a whole bunch of craziness happening here.
Yeah.
What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to click here and I'm going to choose Microsoft Edge. There we go. So there's my browser. A bunch of things are moving. Gears somewhere, something is spinning. And
Hello world.
so I got Hello World. That's not what I wanted. That doesn't make any sense. Because I got Hello World, that's cool, I've succeeded in doing that.
Yeah.
But I thought that, how do I stop this? There we go, stop. I thought my index.html would get served.
And if you had a web server pointing at a folder that had index.html in it, that's probably what would happen. So when you pressed F5, what's down in your taskbar down there, like in your tray, system tray, right down on the right there? What have you got down there? If you
I've got Dropbox. Right now I don't have anything going on.
Now when you press the VCR
So
play
if I
button again?
hit the button and hit play, so there you go. Edge started.
And what's down there in the system tray? So what's that little thing there? IIS Express.
So this is a useful tip. You can actually click on this little expansion here, and you can drag that out and put it in the tray and have it stay out there.
All the time.
Stay out there. So what is IIS Express?
So what happens if you... Yeah, so IIS Express is... So when you host a web application, you need a server, a thing that is going to accept requests coming in and it's going to return whatever has to be returned, responses back to the browser. So what's happening when you press that play button inside Visual Studio is it's starting up IIS Express. And it's configuring IIS Express to point to your project that you're running inside Visual Studio, and then it is starting up whatever browser you picked in that list, and it's pointing it at wherever IIS Express is listening.
So this is a good reminder. So you're saying that it's starting up the web server and the web browser at the same time. It
Yes.
started two things.
Two things, but they are independent of each other in that the only link is that the browser is being told to go to the URL that IIS Express was started up to listen on.
So this says 40, local host, which
Yeah,
is my computer.
your machine.
40651, and I'm assuming that if I go over here,
That's where you're browsing to, right?
okay, so
Right.
also, and
Yeah,
so somehow Visual Studio knew that, it came up with this port number, and it told both of them.
Yes, but the thing is that now if we can stop all of that.
All right.
Now the thing is that when your web application starts up, it runs the startup CS, right?
Right, so Startup CS is here, and we talked about that. That's the thing that runs on boot.
On boot, right?
boot,
That's how
for
we
lack of a better
start
word.
our app. And it has these configure methods, and you can see something in here that you saw when you ran your application.
Okay,
right?
so we're going to configure our application
Yeah.
on startup, and when my app runs,
But there's one thing you know about this, right? Which is this thing is saying "Hello World!" exclamation mark. So if you
that's
change
where that text came from.
Well, yeah. I mean, what if you change it and run it again?
Hello, Scott.
So, yeah.
Okay,
So
now
this
we
is
know
where
where
Hello
that's
World is coming
coming
from. Okay.
Okay.
So what's happening here? Why is this thing? Why is that happening? Why does this work this way? So we talked about how we've got IIS Express started up and it's running my application.
Well, and I'm also noticing as you're talking here, I'm adding in like
Other things.
other stuff.
And it's always coming
It's
back
always
the same
saying
thing.
hello world.
Yeah,
It's-
if you put in like index.html, it still
that's a
doesn't
good
do
point.
anything.
I want index.html. That will give me my static page, right? No, it's giving me hello Scott again.
So, what happens when, now, we said IIS is starting up, IIS Express is starting up your web application. So what happens there? The ASP.NET team write a bunch of code that when IIS Express starts, it calls this, it uses a bunch of our code runs, and eventually what we do is we call this configure method here in the startup class, this one,
Yeah.
and we say, and when this method builds up the code that we are going to use to respond to any requests that come into your application. So if we think about the internet, step back a little bit and think about the way that the internet and web applications work is your browser is sending a request. You know, it's a bunch of text
Sure.
with stuff in it. The request is get me whatever is at this URL, and it's giving a URL. So we parse the URL and everything, and then we pass that to some pipeline of stuff. Now, and inside that code, in your configure method, you're defining the pipeline that is going to run. In this case, what we're doing is saying run this write async hello world. So regardless of what happens, regardless of the request that's coming into the server, it's always going to write hello world because
I
that's
see.
the only thing
So
your
there's-
application knows how to do.
There's no
is write
code
hello
here that
world.
says, hey, pick up index.html and give that to me.
No.
There's no code here that says, I want this for /Glenn and this for
Exactly.
So even more, we could do what's called F12 tools. F12 is the function key.
Yeah.
F12 Developer Tools is available in your browser, whether you're using Chrome, Firefox, IE. It's a standard thing. If I click on F12 Developer Tools, this little thing's going to pop up. It's another developer environment. And what's
Yeah.
great about this is you have this even on non-technical parents' computer.
Yes, you do.
Everybody's got this.
Yeah.
So if we click on Network, okay, and we hit refresh,
Yep. You can see this. See
yeah,
the
so we're
request.
actually seeing it. So let's open that up a little bit. So here is the request. The request was
Get this
a
URL.
get. Go and get that. There you go. Request
Yeah.
method get.
Yep.
Okay. And we had some headers
Some
that
headers,
said,
yeah.
here's the things that we'll accept.
Yeah.
You know, here's
Yeah.
who we are. We're
Yeah.
Windows.
Yeah, we're apparently Mozilla.
Right. And ooh, look at this. Here's the response. So then, who gave this? Was this IIS Express?
This was the ASP.NET stack, right?
So IIS Express says, hey, look, it's me, I'm IIS.
Yeah.
I'm the Internet Information Server,
Yeah.
powered by ASP.NET. Okay.
That's the thing that's handling this request that's come in, right?
Now, these are the headers. The headers are kind of like the outside of the envelope,
Yes.
not the contents of the envelope.
Yeah.
How do I see inside? I click on body. There's really nothing going
nothing.
on there.
It's just some text.
So how do I get this to give me that HTML?
Well, when we were building this, we wanted this to be very modular. So you can, this app.run is a little bit unusual. You don't normally really do this. This is just for the sake of a Hello World demo.
Right. Well, we're doing,
Normally-
to be clear, we want to give people, even though you're beginners, we want to give you a little bit of
a hint.
insight in what's going on underneath.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, if you had pressed F5 on your own and seen Hello World and then done like a solution search for Hello World, you would have found this line and said, oh, okay, this thing is writing out Hello World. So at least you would know that.
Right.
What we actually do in this configure method usually is stitch together things that we call middleware, which are pieces of code that will run to handle a request as it goes, as it comes into the server. right?
Interesting. So let's switch back here. Let me see if I understand that. I'm going to bring up Notepad, and this
Yeah.
is just for me understanding the concept.
Yeah.
So I have some web application,
Yep.
and a request comes in for something, you know, /foo, And you said that there's something called middleware.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that middleware is software that's in the middle.
Yep.
And it's got to do a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
What are some of the things? I assume one of them is give back HTML.
Yes. So there is things like static files.
Okay, so
There's a static file middleware.
Serve a file.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then there is a authentication. There's some
Oh, so
middleware.
authentication is ask for passwords.
Yeah. Prompt for, deny this request
And
because
deny.
it's not authenticated, right? Things like that.
Yeah.
There's some routing middleware.
Right, we'll talk about routing. We'll have a whole
Yeah.
section on routing.
Yeah, and that's how you get into MVC world, where you start actually having controllers and doing dynamic HTML and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's sort of some of the things you might do. There's effectively you can do anything. We have a diagnostics page middleware.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about
have a-
diagnostics and
Yeah.
logging. So
and we have a hello page where the hello page, just any request made that gets to the hello page just has a page saying hello, but it's actually HTML.
So then these are all different things you can do.
Yeah.
They're all optional.
Yep.
We could just make our pipeline just that.
Yeah.
Just get back some HTML.
Yep.
So then that means, if I understand correctly, what our current middleware is this.
Return hello world.
Is return hello world.
Exactly. That's
So
what it
we
is.
have a piece of middleware
Yeah.
that does one thing.
Yep. and
Which
it
is not
returns
very
hello
useful.
world. Not terribly so.
So
but
then
I mean,
I want.
It is kind of amazing that you were able to make a request and it did all that stuff and
that
it
is
returned hello
amazing.
world. But yeah,
So then what I'd like to do is I'd like to get rid of that middleware and
Yeah.
I want to
serve static
put
files.
in one that serves a file.
Okay,
Do I have
so-
to write that?
Yeah. You
Do I have to write go and get the file?
You need to write app dot
Dot.
use static files.
Now, when we talked about IntelliSense earlier, this is where IntelliSense
Yeah.
comes
So
in.
you won't actually see this method in here yet, right?
The method, what is the method I'm looking for?
The method that you're looking for is called use static files, right? Yeah.
So I type
static files.
use, and I see use,
Yeah.
and I see use middleware.
Yeah. Now then, this is important, right? So if you were going to write, this is a concept. This is advanced. It's called inline middleware. You don't ever really want to call these two methods.
Oh, okay.
What most of the time we can talk about what they're for later if it makes sense.
So I need a library to do
You need a library to do this, and the way that these are added is usually as extension methods.
So it's going to be a method that lives on app
Yeah.
that'll do some stuff.
Yeah.
So
that's
this is a
exactly what it's gonna
library.
be.
I know that I can right-click over here on the right-hand side. We've got this references area.
Yep.
If we open that up, the references area shows me, look at that. So here we see that we've got one that talks to IIS and the web,
Yep.
but that's basically it because this is empty, right?
Yes, it is.
So I'm going to right-click and I'm going to say, do I say add reference or do I say,
So there's a couple of things you can do here.
because there's a lot of stuff going on here.
There is lots of stuff going on here. There's a couple of things you can do. One of them that is particularly cool is just don't do this.
Okay,
Go back to your configure method.
all right.
Write app.use static files. Capital U, capital S,
Static
capital F,
files.
and round
Yes.
bracket, semicolon. Just finish the statement.
All right.
Okay, and you get this little red squiggly, right? This is not the method you're looking for because we
Right,
don't
it's
have a
kind of
method
the,
that's
it's,
called
it's
this,
like
right?
spell check.
Yeah.
Does not
Right.
contain use static
It says
files.
show potential fixes.
Ooh. It's actually going to help me fix it? That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can just see what that does. What does it give you? Add package Microsoft.asp.NET.static files.
Okay, so if I click that,
Yeah. Ah, look over there,
so this
see?
just actually appeared. So I thought I was going to have to go in here and
You can do that.
go
but
look
if-
for that.
Yeah, but if
it
you
actually suggested it.
if you know the method you're looking for, which you don't often, but if you did,
Oh, okay.
you could have just typed it.
So this library, this icon here is the
NuGet
icon for a thing called a
icon.
NuGet.
Yeah.
NuGet.
Yep.
And that's a library.
Yeah.
If you're a Node person or a PHP person, it's a package that came out from the cloud. And I notice now that use static files is not squiggled anymore.
Yes, that's right. Because we now know we're now using static files. So
Okay.
now there is a piece of middleware running before our return hello world, and it is saying if return any static files that are being requested.
Okay. So in my naivete,
Yep.
now I will hit this, and I'm going to get my hello world. But now, clever man that I am, I'm going to type index.html, and I still don't see my index.html. So that's concerning.
Somewhat annoying, isn't it?
Well,
So-
it's concerning only because it's not
Because you
intuitive.
don't understand. So there's a thing called root.
So www root is right here.
Yes.
And it looks like a little world.
Little world
thing.
icon. Now, when your web application starts, it needs to point at a folder. When IIS Express starts, it points
So
at
when
a
you say
folder on the local
slash,
machine.
whatever, my website slash, that needs to be a home somewhere.
Yeah, so for those of you who have been doing web, like just HTML, you just put a HTML file called index.htm in the root of the root of where your server points.
And that's why I was doing that.
Yeah.
I think that I figured that the project is the root of the web server.
In ASP.NET 5, in previous versions of ASP.NET, that was generally true. In ASP.NET 5, we created this concept of the www root, or your web root, which is what that folder is, and we said that is where we're going to point the web server at.
I see. So is that a way of kind of keeping things tidy?
Yeah. So the problem with index.htm, with the root of your project being the root of your website, is you've got that like hosting.ini file there, right?
Okay, what is hosting.ini?
Well, it doesn't matter. Well, we can talk about what it is.
Something
it's
that
just some file, right?
Oh, I see.
In this case, what it's doing is you can run this without IIS Express, and this file helps configure that, and we've set up the application.
But the point you're making is that it's a file I don't want to give.
It's a file you don't want to give to people outside of the world. So unless your web server stops you from returning that ini file, if your web server points to the project and then they type in hosting.ini, it'll return hosting.ini.
So I don't necessarily want all of my images and my HTML to be served out of here.
You just want.
So I'm going to pick this up then and just drop it in there.
Yeah.
So now it's in there.
HTML.
And just to confirm, I'm going to right click, open folder in File Explorer, and there we go. See, I see www root.
Yeah.
Just to make sure I understand, there's my project, and there's a folder underneath it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do that. So we're going to hit this, and I'm going to say index.html. There we go.
Yeah.
So now I've got some actual static HTML.
Yeah. And now anything that you put in here can be returned. Images, JavaScript, CSS, HTML. So now you've got an ASP.NET web application that is just returning HTML. Just the same. If you just put any HTML in there and someone browses to it, it'll get returned.
Is the order important? I put static files
order
before.
is definitely. Why don't we just reorder it and see?
Okay, so I'm going to take static files and I'll put it down here.
Yeah.
And I'll run it again.
Yeah. It's an important concept with middleware is this ordering concept.
Okay, that makes sense though. I mean, a pipeline is pieces of the pipe that are plugged together in a specific order.
So the computer science. Yeah, look at that.
Yep, there it is.
Yeah. Cached in the browser.
Well, that was a cache, so I hit refresh.
Yeah.
But you're right. So it's never. This is a piece of middleware. It did get configured. It's just never going to run.
Yeah, it's not going to run because our run method is always returning hello world as soon as it gets hit, and the pipeline is processed in order. So the request goes through the first one first, and then it goes through in order. As soon as something handles the response, the rest of the pipeline doesn't run. Okay, so for some middleware like static files, it'll say, is this a request for a static file that I can handle? If it is, return it. Otherwise, go to the next thing in the pipeline. That's how you can do things like error handling middleware, for example. We have an error handling middleware which you can say app.use error handling, and then if any exceptions ever occur later in your application, it'll catch them on the way back. Because your request comes in and then the response goes back out of the pipeline.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So I just went back into the F12 tools, and I can see my get asked for index.html.
Yeah.
And the body of my response is in fact that HTML.
All of HTML.
Makes total sense.
The world makes sense for the person who just knows about HTML.
Well, and even better, I'm assuming I can go over to my Solution Explorer. I can click on index.html. Let's say I get rid of all of this HTML I don't want.
You make it say hello world again.
And there you go. See? Why not, right?
Yeah, you can do that.
I'm going to save that, switch back over here, and hit refresh, and now I'm back where I was.
Where you
Except
were
this is
a static HTML page. And apparently a green squiggly HTML page.
That's just telling me, oh, it must include a body.
Yeah, because it's invalid. It's not. It will still work, but you shouldn't do this. This is sort of help that Visual Studio gives you when writing HTML, right?
Well, and as I'm starting to type here,
it's saying, give me, you need a body here, or a head, or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'll go like that.
Yep.
Oh, and look at that. It actually indented
That's
it
for me. Yeah.
nicely for me.
So for those of you who are maybe just developers, been using Sublime Text,
Yeah,
and
I'm gonna do that
you
again,
get some of
actually.
this benefit, but
that
maybe,
again.
maybe not all of it.
Body,
Yeah.
close, enter,
Yeah.
hello world. And then when I hit save, watch the green line here.
Yeah.
These
all
green
good.
lines are the ones that changed. I'm going to then Alt-Tab back over here, and there you go.
Yeah. Nothing
Okay, cool.
changed, but you feel better about yourself because you didn't violate the standards.
All right, cool. So at this point, we have made an empty ASP.NET application. We've served a static file. We've inserted a piece of middleware into this.
We have.
This is not typically how you would start a new project,
No, not typically.
but this does give you a comfortable understanding of the relationship between the browser and IIS and Visual Studio, what the responsibilities are.
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to open up the full web application.
Yes, we'll start with that other template that we talked about earlier, the web application template, and we'll do something with that.
Dig into that, and we'll do a little bit more server-side work. And I hope that you're enjoying us here on the Microsoft Virtual Academy.